Welcome. My name is Dave Oswald. I work for Endurance. Bluehost is the company within Endurance that I work for. I run Salt Lake Perl Mongers. For those of you who don't know me, raise your hand if you're a Salt Lake Perl Monger in this room. Salt Lake, we've got a number of us here, so welcome. Bluehost is often looking for people, so if you're interested in talking to us about that, please talk to me or talk to Doran or one of the others of us from our company. But you're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about this. And the topics we're going to deal with today are at ink. That's not a typo. We're going to talk about dot. We're going to talk about percent ink, code injection through ink, and then after that, if there's any time, we'll either talk about religion or politics. I'm kind of hoping that there won't be any time for us to do that. So one of the wonderful things about Perl is, we have Perl's maker, but the other thing is all of us, the Perl community, many of whom happen to be in this room, which is not a little bit intimidating. Anyway, the Perl community, and the Perl community is wonderful, it's awesome, and the Perl community brought us this mess, which is SaintCON and Perl modules. So thank you very much to the whole Perl community, everybody here, anybody who's contributed to SaintCON. Let's talk a little bit about that. Through the beauty and magic of SaintCON, we can do things like this, which is we have a web scraper there that's searching the DOM in a one-liner. So thank you very much to the Modulicious people for doing that for us, right? Yes, thank you. Or we can do really useful things like this, which does that. Fizz buzz as a one-liner, and not just a one-liner that you even have to think about, just use the module, right? So we get those things through the power of use, require, and for people that were around in Perl 4, and I guess it still works, do. But we have to sometimes stop and ask ourselves, how does that work? How do we get the magic of use, require, and do? Perl has this concept called ink, and ink is where Perl looks for the libraries that's going to load. And so I'm using Perl-V to find what Perl thinks are the libraries that it should be using and loading. And how does Perl know where to look? He's looking for spare change. So through the package or the global array ink. And so here I'm dumping ink, and as you can see, I'm using Perl brew to use Perl 526. And we get a list of elements in ink. So let's talk a little bit about manipulating ink. You can push elements into ink, which will make it so that Perl will look in this case /foo/lib as the last place it looks for a module. Here we're telling it to put foo/lib as the first place that it looks for modules. Here we're going to remove an element from ink if it matches foo/lib. And here we're going to grep, and we're making it, I haven't decided what we're going to grep for, but we can make a localized change to ink as well. Although this one's totally useless because we localized it and the local scope evaporates as soon as the begin block ends, right? I think that was an oversight when I made the slide. So anyway. So here we have an example. I'm going to turn off Perl brew. And now I'm going to say Perl-ink, and instead of getting the list of entries that were specific to Perl brew, now I'm getting a list of entries that are specific to site Perl or system Perl in this case. And here I'm going to tell Perl brew instead to use Perl 510, and I get the Perl 510 list of elements. Now, look real closely here at Perl 510, and then let's take a look here. Is there a notable difference? Aside from the paths that are listed, aside from the 526 and 510, you see a difference here? Dot! Yeah, okay, so thank you very much to Sawyer for giving some of my talk yesterday in 5 minutes. No, just kidding. Perl 526 officially removed dot from ink. Some operating system distributions have this feature backported in. So here's, I think this is my system Perl for Ubuntu, and this is backported in for the purposes of 524 having the same patch, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And So here's an example of when I run Perl-E, say for ink on Perl 524, you can see dot is also not there, but that's because because Debian, and they probably got it from, or Ubuntu probably got it from Debian, they've backported in this, this patch. And so the question is why, and again, thanks to Sawyer, we all know why. No, just kidding. It's only a dot, right? How important and how significant could that be? Well, the dot represents the current working directory. And so here we have code that there's too much on the screen to look at, so let's look at just a part of it. And I'm going to run a script from my current working directory, and it's going to tell me that I'm in my current working directory of home d Oswald. And we'll run it again from temp, and it's going to tell me that my current directory is temp. And now we're going to look again, we're going to examine temp. Well, what is the significance? Why did I list the directory temp? Well, I did it specifically to point out the fact that who can write to temp? Anyone. Has anyone here ever run any script whatsoever from temp? Yeah, any one of us probably have, right? So, and this is a problem because, so here we have package foo, which is going to die with I told you so for no good reason. And we're going to go ahead and run that. And up at the top there, we can see when I run it, Perl-m foo, E1, it's going to just tell us told you so. And I can't remember why the compilation failed. I did something. So, and I'm going to cat foo just to show us which foo we're getting. We're getting the foo that we think we're getting, which is I told you so. So now we're going to switch to Perl 526, and we're going to run the same thing, and we get all this can't locate, and that's because dot was removed. And so why is all of this a problem? Well, the problem is that behavior changes based on where we're running the script from. Here's an example. We're going to look at the told you so again, but now we're going to look at using, we're going to cd into temp, and we're using Perl 510, and instead of I told you so, we get now I own you. Why? Because I dropped a module and I sabotaged myself and dropped a module into temp, and all of a sudden we're getting the wrong module. And we just got owned, maybe. Because many times if I'm in temp doing something, I might be there to be investigating a problem that some user maybe caused, and I might even be masquerading as root at the moment, right? And so this is a problem. And you might say, well, I know all of my module dependencies, and they're all installed, and dot is the last thing that comes in ink, and so no big deal, right? No big deal. So, but what about this? So here we're going to eval require some optional dependency or warn that we're skipping the optional dependency. So that sounds reasonable enough. And we'll go ahead and run it, and oh, everything's great. We're skipping the optional dependency. But now we're going to cd into a directory where I happen to know that that optional dependency is not immediately available. However, or we're going to cd into a directory where somebody's dropped in something else for us, a little thank you. All your base belong to us. Oh no, we've just been owned, right? So by changing into another directory where that optional dependency has been just dropped there by a friendly user somewhere, we now just got ourselves owned. I'll pause for you to take a picture. Yeah, thank you. Want me to smile? No, just kidding. And if we just cat that optional dependency, you can see, fortunately, I just was printing all your base belong to us. I didn't actually clobber my own laptop. So what just happened, the script's behavior changed based on where we ran it from. So from my home dir, it skipped the optional dependencies, but when I changed into the scripts folder, it found that optional dependency and ink loaded it because it was using dot as the last element in ink. So, but that's exactly what we would expect, right? That's what we want to have happen. Well, sure, if you're always on a non-shared system and you always run your scripts from the same working directory and you always know all of the dependencies and all of the optional dependencies of all of your scripts and all of the modules that your scripts use and all of the modules that they use and all of the optional dependencies and so on and so forth, and that you never ever miss any of those details above ever, then that's just fine. That's great. That works perfectly. However, we often develop for shared systems. I know within my company, I often develop for shared systems, and I think you do too, right? Yeah. cPanel was one of the early people to have discovered this issue. I think Debian reported it up in 2010, and then cPanel, Todd Rinaldi reported it up in 2012, and it made it up from there. So we often develop for shared systems, and there are many paths that are globally writable. Temp, now username may not be globally writable, but it's writable by a user, and at some point an admin might change directory into a user's directory, find a problem and say, oh, I have a script that fixes this, and run that script, and he's in a user's home dir. That's not safe, right? Or it wasn't safe. Nobody's infallible. Mistakes happen. Vigilance requires thought and energy. And thought and energy don't happen by default, especially on Mondays. So as long as dot is in ink, you can't ever be sure when you run a script from a path that is writable by anyone aside from yourself that it's going to be okay. Lazy dependencies are even harder to assure, as we saw. So here we're going to look at, here we only load a module optionally at some random interval. We'll go ahead and load a module. Well, that one you can't ever be sure that you're executing all of the code paths that would run that module. Actually, as you approach infinity, eventually you're going to hit the point where randomness becomes normalized. But the general point is that when you have multiple paths that could be lazily loading dependencies, you might not even be aware that there are some dependencies that could get loaded at some point in the future. And so, but wait, there's more. I actually chose all your base or belong to us for a specific reason. Anybody know what that reason is? Base.pm, thank you. So here we have package mybase that's going to be a base class, and now I'm going to use base.pm, use base mybase to make package main, to make package main inherit from mybase. And but this is totally safe, right? Because I've inlined mybase within the same file as package main, right? That could never break, could it? Except, where does base look first? Does it look inline first? Anybody happen to know? If I'm feeding this to you, you can shake your head, right? It doesn't look there first. Base.pm is going to look through all of your entries in ink first. So if I run that from a directory that doesn't have any other modules to load, then this is safe, hello world. But if I load it from a directory where I've got a module named mybase in it, then you've been owned again, right? So this is one of the shortcomings of base. There's our gotcha. So even if a module is inlined in base, base.pm looks at ink first before falling back to the inlined version of a module. So something to be aware of. Things to remember then are never execute any script from any path that anyone can write to who isn't you. That might be something to remember if you're not running a patched version of Perl. Certainly never with elevated privileges. And especially not if you're using base.pm. The problem is you're probably using modules, and unless you skim the source code for all of those modules, who's using base, who's using optional dependencies. So never do so if you have dependencies on modules with optional dependencies, or dependencies on modules that use base.pm, or dependencies on modules that have dependencies on modules that have optional dependencies, or that use base.pm, or on Mondays. Right. And never ever let anyone else on your system do that either, even on Saturday at 3:47 a.m. It's too much to remember. And it's too much to remember and never forget to remember, and to insist that nobody else ever forget to remember ever either. So I'm telling us all to be clever, except that nobody can be clever 100% of the time. And I think that MJD, who may or may not have been in here a minute ago, no, not in here right now, gave a talk about how you can't be clever all the time, or wrote an article about it. Anyway, here's one area where you could have gotten owned without even realizing it. Perldoc Perlvar. Well, Perlvar, or Perldoc, has optional dependencies. And so if you happen to be in a user's directory or in temp or in some other world writable place, and you run Perldoc on an unpatched version of Perl, somebody who knows about these optional dependencies could drop in there into temp, for example, pod perldoc2term.pm, and now they can own you. by using their own version of that module, which gets loaded. So let's talk about some steps to protect ourselves before moving on to more fun. And how to protect yourself even when you don't feel clever. So first is use Perl 526. Who's using Perl 526? Everywhere. Set up a site customized.pl. Anybody know what that does? So this is how Debian and ultimately Ubuntu backported the feature into Perl 524 is by setting up a site customized.pl, which Perl will load as a module actually, or do as a module probably, and it pops off of inc dot, or it pops it off the end of dot. Do the same for any containers for your Perl brew environments that are not Perl 526. Plemv is another one where you're already changing into another directory and getting a different set of features, right? The feature that we want to keep everywhere we look is the removal of dot. So here we turn off Perl brew. Perl brew's turned off. We go ahead and look and see what is available. We're looking here at config sitelib, and this is how Perl knows where to find the sitelib, what was it called? Site customized.pl module. It looks in where config sitelib thinks it should look. Here under Perl brew 526, it's telling it to look for that under site Perl 526. And so whichever version of Perl you're using, and if you're using Perl brew, make sure to drop that site customized.pl modification in the appropriate places to make sure that you're getting protected. So set up site customize. Now also patch the scripts that you control. And here's an example of how we can patch the scripts that we control. In all of the 600 or so scripts that you have on your system, drop in a begin block at the very beginning of the script that pops off dot. And that's if you can't set up a site customized.pl, right? And I actually had to do this recently, and it was actually 600 scripts, 611. So, okay, another one, use parent. Why should we use parent? Better than base, thank you. And in this particular situation, what it's better about it is that it doesn't automatically default to falling back, or it doesn't automatically default to looking outward before looking at inlined modules first. So, yeah. So parent.pm will start with the inlined code and then fall back to inc, which is kind of the opposite of base. Patch every module in your control. That doesn't mean everything that you've downloaded from CPAN. It means download everything that you own, that you own the source code for. And here is a patch where we're saying go ahead and localize inc and then pop off that last dot and then go ahead and require or use the module that we need. And then when the scope expires, we have inc back to normal so that we aren't clobbering all of the other modules that we're using. So use Perl 526, use site customize, patch your scripts, use parent, patch the modules that you control, and ask upstream authors to patch their modules as well. Pull requests are usually welcome. Let's talk for a minute about %inc. How does %inc differ from @inc? One's a hash. Go ahead. Yes. So @inc is where to look, and %inc is what we just got, what we got. So inc knows what was loaded and where it came from. And here I'm using a local lib called scripts, and I'm using strict, and I'm using optional dependency, and then I'm going to say the name of the module and the path. And you can see that I'm getting my all your base or belong to us from optional dependency, which is in scripts optional dependency.pm. So I use inc occasionally when I want to know where I got a module from. It's kind of useful in that regard. But it has another use. So if if an entry already exists in inc, it won't be loaded again. And that turns out to be sometimes a useful feature. If an entry is removed from ink, a module may be loaded again, and that can sometimes be a useful feature, though it can also produce surprising results. In my example earlier, I used -m to load the optional dependency, which for those who were here in the last hour, and everybody here probably already knows anyway, it's to load a module in a one-liner easily. Well, it turns out that -m, the command line switch, happens too soon for you to do anything about it in your -e block of code. You can't put a begin block in -e and have it affect what's happened in your -m loads. So by then it's already too late, just as a word of warning. But for most other scripts, sticking a begin block at the top will allow you to manipulate @ink and $ink for twiddling. So here we have Acme FizzBuzz, which we used earlier in the talk, and under normal conditions it'll give us a list of 100 things, and I'm getting the head of 15. But now we're going to stick in a little begin block up there to suggest to Perl that Acme FizzBuzz has already been loaded from some path called dummy. And so now when I run scripts FizzBuzz, I get no output because Acme FizzBuzz won't reload. Perl already thinks it's been loaded. So you can produce surprising results. There's some risk to using these sorts of things. So know what you're doing, right? So I use it for discovering where a module's going to be loaded from. You can also use perldoc-l and give it a module name. That's kind of a more static approach, but dynamically you can find out right in your own runtime by using %ink to find out where a module came from. So now let's do a quick review. Ink informs Perl where to find your modules. And that's for the purposes of use and require and do. It was removed from Perl 5.26 somewhat agonizingly. If you read the Perl 5 porters thread, and then the longer thread, and then the other threads, yes, go ahead, please.
Just the public stuff.
That was just the public stuff that I could read, yeah, because we have not colluded before this, right? Yeah. So, yeah, that's just the public stuff. It's agonizingly painful because they knew that there was the potential to break not only all of CPAN. All of CPAN is the part that we know we're breaking. Like you can scan CPAN and run the test suites and find out what breaks for the most part. But there's also, presumably, we have still a few hundred users, even thousands or a million users who could also be having their scripts broken as well. So it was an agonizing decision, but was done for very good reasons. Ink also informs Perl of what modules have been loaded. And you can manipulate both @ and %ink usefully and somewhat riskily. Right? But loading modules from the file system is so boring. That's so 1990s. We've been doing that for years. Right, loading modules from the file system. If we're still using Perl nowadays, it's because we're doing it because it's fun. At least to me it is, and that's why I still use Perl, even though I get paid for it. But I do it because I use Perl because it's fun, and I hope it is to you. So let's have a little bit of fun now. And at this point, we've now moved out of the practical realm. I want to make that kind of clear. And although there are practicalities to the things that we will explore next, caveat emptor. In fact, it may be totally useless, insecure, and impractical, and insane, but it's still coming next, and it may be fun, and that's the important thing by some values of fun. So this is from perldoc-f require. You can also insert hooks into the import facility by putting Perl code directly in the ink array. There are 3 forms of hooks: subroutines, references, and subroutine references, array references, and blessed objects. This does sound kind of fun, doesn't it? I don't know. I guess I don't know how you could do this kind of thing with C, although Perl's written in C, so I guess you could always use Perl to do it. So subroutine references are the simplest case. That's another quote from perldoc-f. And so we'll probably do that. If you need to use an array reference or a blessed object to insert code into Ink, then you'll need to talk to one of these other people, many of whom are in this room. I'm turning them loose on y'all. No. So we'll talk about subrefs and executing code via a subroutine reference in Ink. So, thank you. I'm halfway through, and that's about right. When you push a subroutine reference into Ink, then that subref needs to expect two parameters. The first parameter will be a reference to itself, to its own, to the very code ref you just pushed in, so that you can get recursive. And heaven help you if you ever do that. I don't even know what that's used for. And the next thing is the file name of the module to load. And then the code ref must return the following. And this, although I can't quite figure out a good way to word the documentation better than it's written, it's still kind of hard to grok. And so I'll try to discuss it. Return nothing if this isn't a target module known to this handler. So if you consider the code ref that you've pushed into Ink to be a handler, you certainly wouldn't want it to respond by loading foobar for any module that you ask for. And so only respond with an affirmative return if it is a module that you care to handle. Otherwise, go ahead and just return nothing, and Perl will understand to either move along to the next thing in Ink, or if this is the last one, then to give the all-famous, the module doesn't exist, where I expect to find it. So, any questions or comments so far? Okay. It must also, if you intend to handle this subref, or if you intend to handle this module that's being requested, then you can return a reference to a scalar containing text to prepend to the string that constitutes the module. And then optionally, either a file handle to read from, which would return one line for of the module for every line of the file handle that's read, or a subref, another subref, that for each call to that subref returns one line of the code that you wish to comprise the module that you're trying to load. So it's a little bit confusing. And one of the things that is a little bit confusing in the documentation is it makes it kind of sound like number 2 and 3 down below there have to be in that order, because it actually uses the words in this order. But that's not quite right. You need to have the 0th item there as the first item, and then one of the next two things. So just to keep that straight. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So we need to accept two parameters. We must return either nothing or a reference to a scalar of prepended text, and optionally a file handle or a subref. So let's first try something that we never should do, probably, and that's to totally bypass everything that we just talked about and just create a type glob. So this code right here is going to push into Ink a subref for a subroutine named load. And then the next thing that it's going to do is return if the subroutine doesn't match something that we know how to handle. And then it's going to go ahead and convert the path of the subroutine just to the : nomenclature that we are typically used to seeing. But then the very last thing is that rather than actually returning code, it's just going to create a type glob. It's going to jam into our caller's namespace, or into that module's namespace, a subroutine. And then we're going to go ahead and use the convenient feature of prepending by appending to our module a 1 so that it becomes a legal module. And we can run that, and we get called foo, which is the output that that subroutine should create for us. And it works. So now let's try something a little bit more the way the documentation would have us do it, and that's to return a scalar reference to a string of module code. However, in this case, instead of calling it module code that we are prepending to something, this is just the entire module's code. And so we're using a here doc, and it's the old school here doc. I'm sorry, this is 526, but it's still the old school here doc. And we're going to use that as our module's code, and we're going to return a reference to it. And then we use foobar, and we go ahead and invoke that subroutine, and again, we get called foo. In fact, I probably copied the previous slide. Now let's return a file handle. So the interesting thing here, I'm going to go off camera for a second. You still have to return your reference to a string. That has to still be the 0th element in your return value. And then you can return a file handle after that. And so I don't want to prepend anything to what I'm returning from my file handle. And so I'm just taking a reference to an empty string. And then the next trick I'm doing is something that's been around ever since, I think, Perl 5.6, which is I'm just opening a file handle to an in-memory scalar anyway, because I just want to demonstrate in one slide how we can use a file handle. That file handle gets returned. Internally, Perl goes ahead and reads package foobar sub foo1 and turns that into a module. And then we can go ahead and invoke the method down at the bottom there, foobar foo. And again, I copied the same slide because it works the same way as before. And so now let's try returning a subroutine. So in this case, once again, we still have to return a reference to a string. And once again, I don't really feel like I want to prepend anything because I have total control anyway at this point. And now I'm going to return a subroutine. And that subroutine is going to each time you call it, it's going to shift an element off of my code, and that will go ahead and populate out the module that we want to load. So as long as there's something still in code, it's going to keep shifting something off, and then at the end, it has to return a false value. The interesting thing here is that we have to populate $_ with the line of code that we're shifting off, and we have to return a true value to say that there was something shifted off, or there's something, that there's still more code to read. And then when we're all done, then we return a 0 or a false value. Is that kind of unclear? Sorry. It took a lot of fiddling to figure some of this out. And again, I was able to copy the same slide from before because it still works. We're still able to use foobar and use that subroutine. And in this case, what it's ended up doing is each time Perl internally calls this subroutine, it shifts another line off of my code array and uses that to populate out the module. So that seems to have worked once again. And again, we're not going to get into array refs and objects because I can't really think of a great use. Somebody probably has a great use, and I'd love to hear about it someday. And they're even harder to use. So, a quick recap: modules load paths contained in inc. Dot is dangerous. %inc can tell us where we found a loaded module. %inc can trick Perl into thinking that a module has been loaded. And that's all boring by comparison to pushing a code ref into inc. That's a lot more fun, although maybe not quite so practical. So now we're going to do something really horrific. Here it comes. Anybody have a comment, question? No? Okay.
I was thinking you are going to add autoload on push it at the beginning of inc, so every function will be your dynamically created function.
This is even worse. No, just kidding. So I've made up a little application based on 4 bits of code. One of them is called module server. And what module server is going to do is anytime I give it a module name, it looks in a path called alt/lib, and it loads the actual text of whatever module it finds there that you've asked for. Pretty risky, pretty dangerous, pretty impractical, and it doesn't deal with, like if you have excess code or code that's customized for a specific environment, it's not going to be tolerant of any of that sort of thing. It's just a proof of concept, right? Netloader. Oh, no, let's talk about bin_libserver.pl. That happens to be a little modulicious script that uses module server as its model, and you can now load using this little modulicious applet the code for a module. And so let's go ahead and do that. If I can find which of my many screens I've got it on. Here we go. You can see I'm only going to hit localhost, and I'm asking for foobar as the. This is over. No, just kidding. Okay, package foobar, use strict use warnings because we don't want to be unsafe, do we? And then we're going to return a version of 42 because. So, I'm sorry. Now we're going to have a module called netloader, which uses a little HTTP tiny thing to do GET requests against bin libserver.pl. And then we have a script called httpmod.pl, which is going to use netloader to load our module from remotely. So let's see if we can find where everything is. So here's my little server running, doing GET requests, and I tested it out a little bit while ago. Here is module server, and this is very dumb code that's pretty boring. It just finds the module based on its module name, and it's going to be looking in home d Oswald scripts /alt/lib because I'm in control of that. Here is netloader, and this is using HTTP tiny, and it's going to do GET requests, and then it's going to go ahead and see that sub load there. Well, we're pushing sub load into inc, and then somewhere else. Here we are. Now we have a script that's using netloader, and then the very next thing that it uses is foobar, and it's going to tell us where we get foobar from, and then it's going to tell us the version of foobar. And so here we go. I'm going to run it, and if everything's still working, then we get module version is 42. So we just did something terribly risky and awful in every way. Does it have any possible uses? I don't really know. You could maintain a mini CPAN. You would have to have every one of your items in that repository signed with some sort of a hash, and then you could use code injection into inc to go ahead and lazily install dependencies. The application would never know the difference. Yeah, go ahead.
MSD has a module object remote that SSHs to a server, ships a bunch of initial code across, and then as you run stuff on the remote server, it just requests it from your local machine and sends it over SSH.
There you go. Thank you. We should have you give the talk. That's great. Yes, yes.
Repeat the question.
Oh, so the question, it wasn't really a question. It was, he has a module, what was it called again? Object remote, which essentially does this in a secure and sane and, yeah. Oh, he's giving us the maybe, yeah. So we don't have full buy-in there either, but so it is a thing. And the application never knows the difference, other than the fact that the end user sees a lag while some module gets pulled in over HTTPS or over some other connection and built out and deployed. Yes.
It's the spiritual cousin of Java's network class loader.
So it's the spiritual cousin of Java's network class loader. Thank you, Randall.
You should probably build one that if you don't have something installed, that goes out to uses CPAN-M to install it.
Yes, that would have been, if I'd had one more day on this talk, that would have been, because that was on my mind. The other thing that was on my mind is, why not deploy and run directly from GitHub? Because there we know the blobs, right? We know the blob IDs, we can do some sanity checking, we're using SSH maybe to retrieve the module. Why not, right? It's possible. So, or how about catch all your servers on fire and start an incident for which there's no hope of sysops forgiveness. And that's that. So further reading on all of this, Perl.doc Perlvar is very useful for and %inc. Perl.doc Perl 5241 delta is an explanation of dot in inc mitigation techniques. Perl 5260 delta is an explanation of the security implications of dot in inc. Perl.doc -f require is an explanation of pushing code into inc. And if I have some time after this conference, I might try to push a couple doc patches out, because just based on the things that I've learned by investigating this. And that's all I have. So you may now proceed to the exit before our servers catch on fire. So, any questions? Comments? Well, thank you. Oh, yes, go ahead. No, oh, you're going to clap. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. Thanks.